Good evening and welcome to Current Issues. I'm your host, Hisham Tilawi. Welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. In this second hour, we will continue speaking with Captain Ward Boston. He was the senior investigator, actually, the senior counsel to the United States Navy Court of Inquiry investigating the USS Liberty, or the attack on the USS Liberty. And in this second hour, we'll continue with Captain Boston, and we will have joining us in a minute Mark Glenn, reporter with American Free Press, who is actually writing a story on the USS Liberty. Captain Boston, welcome back to the program.
Well, I hear you better now.
Good. Tell me, back in 1989, the Navy did admit that the inquiry, the Court of Inquiry, basically concentrated on communications, etc., as we started talking about the first hour. And some of the critics of Admiral Kidd think that he picked and chose the certain areas to investigate, and he did not investigate the whole thing as he was told by the president.
Well, I disagree with that. We looked in every area. I was counsel, and I called every witness that was available that had anything to say about the incident. Now, there were people down below deck that weren't topside the witness or be part of the action, other than after the attack they were there. But no, we looked at everything that was available in that time frame of 1 week. And the people that were on the ship that knew something, and of course the most cogent witness of all was McGonigal. And if you ever see that record, you can see how thorough he was. And even though he shot up pretty badly, he put together a pretty good story of what happened. And he wouldn't talk about Liberty until just before he died. And he died here a couple of years ago. But, now, he obeyed the same command that Admiral Kidd and I did. Okay. Here's something I want to. It's just a short list here, and I want this on the record since you're talking with me. This was David Smythe, S-M-Y-T-H, wrote this in the U.S. Naval Proceedings in 2003, July 2003. Can you hear me?
Yes.
He says, as a interested... Oh, I'm sorry. Can't even read what it says. He was editor with the Associated Press. He said, I sent David... He read this article and said, about 20 years ago... Now, this is David Smith when he was an Associated Press editor. About 20 years ago, I did an AP story on the Liberty incident that was published by the Los Angeles Times and large numbers of the other U.S. newspapers. I spoke to the following officials... their titles corresponded to the positions they occupied at the time of the incident. And they all told me that the Israeli attack was deliberate and not an accident. Secretary of State Dean Rush, Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Thomas Moore, Central Intelligence Agency CIA Director Richard Helms, and National Security Agency NSA Deputy Director Louis Tortello. I still would like to know what led them to this unanimous conclusion, but obviously you have no hope of finding out by questioning the nation's top intelligence and security officials. The information is classified, and they're not going to tell you. I was, however, struck by the fact that they all stated their conclusions clearly, forcefully, and without any qualifications, hedging our ambiguities, because they had at their disposal the intelligence gathering capabilities of State Department, CIA, and NSA. I presume that they had said that. I presume that they had solid grounds for their conclusion. I might add that I gathered other statements. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara told me on the phone that he had no recollection of the attack on Liberty. I found this curious at the time, as I understood him to have the reputation of a man with a filing cabinet memory. I also talked to Admiral Isaac Kidd, who headed the Naval Court of Inquiry. I told him what the others had said, and then asked if he had any opinion. Admiral Kidd said, quote, "The giants of that time can speak out. I know when to keep my mouth shut," unquote. 36 years have gone by since Liberty was attacked. It is not time for U.S. government agencies to release whatever classified information is in their files and clear the matter up once and for all. Anyway, that was named David Smythe, S-M-Y-T-H, and he was associated editor. Editor for the Associated Press. You there?
Yes. Now, I asked you a question in the first hour, and I don't know if you understood what I meant when I said about the two airplanes. I said at first we thought that it was the Egyptians who attacked the Liberty, and
yes,
two nuclear-ready airplanes or jet fighters took off of one of the carrier groups there and was headed towards Cairo to bomb Cairo. Do you know anything about it?
Well, only thing I know is what I learned later, and by that I mean I had no access to that information until I read many years later after this opened up. And actually, I didn't read too much about the matter until after Crystal's book came out, and then that's when I got involved. But I had learned that they were trying, assuming, because the Israelis were putting out the word that it was an Egyptian ship that they hit, and that they were trying their darnest to make it look like the Egyptians, and that's the reason they said they wanted to sink it. And of course, there were two other reasons. The Syrian front was going to be opened up, and then they had this alleged massacre of 200 Egyptians. They had no place to put them. They said no POW camps available. So the story was at least, and I guess a couple of Israeli generals later confirmed that. But anyway, we were Johnson. I think that was in one of those books, either Operation Cyanide, was going to use that as a pretext to hit Cairo. But at least that's my way I remember reading it. But I don't have anything to support that conclusion other than wherever I read it, which is still in the back of my mind.
Okay.
But we did. I'll tell you what, they might have mixed that up because the carrier group was performing off a creek there. We're running a test on I think, going into atomic war if necessary, and they had to change the configuration of the planes that were on the deck that were going to get airborne, and it took a little bit of time. I've heard that later. But those are all stories that came out from other sources, and I'm not a very reliable witness to any of those stories other than what I'd heard. Go ahead.
Very good. I want you to stay with me. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, I understand we have Mark Glenn with us, and we are trying to get him on as we speak. Mark, are you on?
I am.
Yeah, I know you are. I'm trying to get Mark on. Okay. All right. We are having problem connecting with Mark for some reason. Do we have him on, guys?
There aren't any calls to pick up.
Okay. All right. I think he's calling back. Now, while we wait on Mark, Captain Boston, if you know what you know now, I'm going to go back to probably a question I asked you 3 times already. If you know what you know now, would you have done anything different back then?
Well, I don't think I could have done anything differently because I've spent my 35 years in active duty. I've put a lot of people in jail as a prosecutor. I've never put an enlisted man on report, but I had lost a third of my fighter squadron in Yorktown. But I don't think I would have ever given a second thought when the President of the United States and McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, not knowing about the outburst, because Admiral Geist knew things I didn't know. A lot of those people, but you say if I knew then, now, I didn't really have I was just a Navy captain. I wasn't a 2-star, 3-star admiral.
Okay.
And even some of them, there are an awful lot of those people who are apologists for Israel. It makes me sick to see that.
Now, let me ask you a question as a lawyer, as someone who knows the law. Can our political leaders get away with doing what they did back then, even if it was the president?
Well, you know, the only one that came close to hanging was old Nixon. Of course, but Clinton got away with it, and look at the things that he did, and even when they impeached him, why the Yellow Bellies were afraid to go through with it, and that's unfortunate. And they said, "Oh, it'll wreck the government, it'll wreck the country." Well, I'm a firm believer that the truth should come out, and you know, Israeli Mossad, I think their motto is "win through deceit," or words of that effect. And CIA says something about the truth will prevail. But you know, this the whole mess of looking at the way the government operates and the things that are coming out now. Well, I won't talk about my FBI days. I saw things. Now there again, I would have a case wrapped up, take over the U.S. attorney, and I had one in San Francisco, and the U.S. attorney said, "I'm going to decline." I said, "Why?" And so he said, "I've got everything here but a confession." And he said, "Well, I'm running for office. I want to keep my record." And there's political, you know. And I walked out of that office shaking my head and went back to my boss. And the answer I got from Harry Kimball, who was at SAC in San Francisco, we worked for the U.S. attorney. Now, right now, you know, they fired 8 attorneys.
Right.
The U.S. And they're making a big deal out of that. Yet Clinton fired 98.
Right.
Nobody even talk about that.
You know what? I mean, with Clinton, you know, fire all of them. At least it's not going to look like that you're doing it for a political reason. But when you fire 8 and you lie about it, that's a problem. But I tell you what, we don't want to get into that. We have Mark Glenn with us. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Is this the great Hashem Talawi? I'm actually able to talk with him on the show.
No, actually, we have the great Ward Boston.
Mark, could you hear me?
Well, here I am as ordered.
Could you hear me? Half the time I couldn't hear what was going on.
Yes, he can. Can you hear him, Mark?
No, I cannot.
You can't.
Well,
Okay.
I can listen here on the computer, but there's a delay.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about on the phone.
No, I cannot.
Oh, okay, that's great. So let's see if we can do
Well,
this.
I can hear you, Mark.
Yeah, he can hear you. Now, Mark, tell me, you are working for many stories about the Liberty. I understand a series, and you have been talking to Captain Boston. What do you think? Do you have like new information now about the Liberty that you did not know?
Well, it's not necessarily that the information is new. It's been there, but it's been like seeds that have been sitting under the snow all winter. Now, I think that the political climate, given what is going on, the fact that we find ourselves at war against 1 billion people, the political climate is warming to where these seeds are ready to burst forth now and produce some fruit. You know, these things, I mean, this was no less an act of war than when the Japanese attacked our fleet at Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, 1941. The difference being that the Japanese did not have public relations and propaganda infrastructure in place in order to cover it up. And this is one of the things that the American people have got to understand, is that on June the 8th, 1967, the state of Israel declared war against the United States. It's just that the people of the United States did not realize it. And we are feeling the effects of this war today in the fact that we have lost 3,000 Americans on 9/11 and over 3,000 of our young men and women in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, and who knows what's going to happen with regards to Iran. All of this would not be taking place if the American people were made aware of what took place with the Liberty incident. This is why, in my opinion, it is so important. It is something that is real. It is something that is concrete. We have witnesses there. We have credible witnesses. It doesn't require anybody to believe in any kind of conspiracy theories involving remote-control planes or anything like that. All we need to do are look at the bare facts on the ground and listen to the testimony of 3 or 4 witnesses, and from that we can conclude that an act of war was instigated against the people of the United States.
But now, Mark, let me ask you this. I mean, when you say an act of war, that's very much, I mean, no one is going to, I mean, I understand when you attack somebody else's, another country's ship, that is an act of war, definitely. But apparently our president did not take it as such at that time, and his defense minister did not take it as such either, and they both actually have ordered the inquiry to say that it was mistaken identity and closed subject, or subject closed.
Then they are collaborators in this act of war against the United States, and this is what the people of the United States have got to understand. It's not our country anymore. It's not our government anymore. It has been subverted to the interests of a foreign hostile power, whether it's Johnson or whether it's Bush, whether it was McNamara or whether it was Rumsfeld and Gates. The result is the same. We have a government that is in the service of foreign enemies. And so, whether the president declares it to be an act of war or not is irrelevant. When the Japanese attacked the fleet at Pearl Harbor in 1941, it was an act of war, even though it took Congress some time to deliver a declaration of war onto the desk of the president. Okay? So this is something that the American people have got to understand. Your sons and daughters are dying in the Middle East because this nation attacked us 40 years ago, and we were not properly made aware of it. Now, as soon as the American people understand this fact, then they're going to understand that this supposed ally that we have in the Middle East is not an ally at all, at which point we can begin the process of taking back our country and removing our sons and daughters.
Okay. Now, Mark, you said something that is extremely, hard to even digest, that what took place 40 years ago is linked to what is taking place now in the Middle East. Tell me, what's the link here?
The link is we are fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we are preparing to go to war in Iran because the American people have bought into this fantasy that Israel is America's ally. If they were made aware of the fact that Israel was America's enemy, and the proof of this is what took place not just on with regards to the attack of the Liberty, but the cover-up that has taken place 40 years since then.
Okay, Mark, hold on a second. Hold on. Captain Boston, do you see the attack on the Liberty as an act of war?
I thought of it as a bunch of murderous bastards who...
murderous bastards, is that an act of war?
Well, it was certainly an act of war by deception, but they claimed that they justified it. It was the Egyptian horse ship. A horse ship as well. That sounds like a play on words. But an old battered ship that didn't resemble the Liberty at all. So they had all kinds of answers to support their position. And, of course, Crystal went to lengths to trying to say fog of war and all this other garbage. But anybody that's ever flown a fighter plane and shot up a ship, which we did in World War II regularly, you know what you're shooting at. You're not, and there wasn't any question. They knew it was our ship, but they tried to. They thought it was intelligence gathering, that we were going to release information that they were either had murdered the Egyptian, or they were going to attack Syria and the Golan Heights.
Did you tell me yes?
In either instance,
did you tell me yes that you do think that it was an act of war?
Indicated, you put the equation together. Of course, any red-blooded sailor or American would be happy to. And my friend Bill Knudsen, who was an airborne on his way to knock the rascals out of the air, was recalled, and that in itself was almost a treasonable act by the President of the United States, allowing an American ship to be shot up and people killed, and not retaliate in kind. And it was quite obvious who had done it, but as Mark said, it's play on words. Anytime all of these politicians are
now-
on payroll, and of course Israel figured that out, how to manage to control land. They wine and dine them. Every one of them goes over there, and they really live it up. But and they come back and vote them more taxpayers' money, whatever it is, 12, 15, 16 billion dollars a year. And I've been to Israel 3 times, 2 times during the Holy Land.
Tell me about your experience
during Christmas.
in Israel.
And I witnessed, in my mind, the mistreatment of so many of those people living in those awful refugee camps. And the other day, I didn't see much publicity on this, but the other day they had a dang-gone sewage lake, a lake of sewage break and drowned people. You know, there's so many things, inequities over there. But back to the original question, acts of war can be committed in many ways, but in order for our country legally to be, well, they're supposed to be declared by Congress. But we managed for a long time to get ourselves in a quagmire, as they said, and and just like the Tonkin Gulf, that's been proven. I think that Johnson wanted us in there, and that's the way to get us there.
Okay. Now, if it had been any other country besides Israel, you think we would have went to war against that country for destroying one of our ships, correct?
Well, there again, look at Reagan almost went to war on Beirut, but instead he decided to pull out, and we had...
but that was a little bit different. The ship was in international water. Our Marines were in the middle of that mess there in Beirut. And I think Reagan did the right thing for pulling out of that mess, but our ship was in international water. It was not even a fighting ship. It was an intelligence gathering ship.
Well, I won't argue that merits. I won't argue against that, but I think a better example is the coal, which was
right.
We lost 18 or 20 sailors on the coal when it down Yemen, and
right.
There again, they tried to say they knew who did it, but they didn't. Now that's the whole thing, win by deception.
But I'm not talking about any other ones, because it could have been a false flag operation with the coal or anything. I'm talking about this one. We know that it was not a false flag operation. We know that it was one of our ships, and we know who attacked it. It's not like the coal, and it's not like anything else. Would we have went to war if, in fact, it was any other country than Israel? But what I wanted to follow up that question with is, how would you describe the relationship between the United States and Israel in simple terms? Is it like a stubborn son, or is it like a bad son that we can't raise right? Or what is the relationship between the United States and Israel?
Propaganda. They sold a bill of goods to the American public, and they do it through our Congress, and the Congress won't do anything about it because they have been told that we need that little piece of land the size of from here to the Imperial Valley up to L.A. It's a small country, and Jesus easily could have gotten around like they said he did. But no, I don't have the answer to that, because number one, I'm not that smart, but number two, the politics that plays into that, and it's been playing ever since Harry Truman said the biggest mistake he made, and I've got that quote, and you know who wrote that was Sapphire, when he said when the Jews were under the thumb of Germany, they squeal like kids, and then when they got on top, that they're worse than the people bothered them before. So old Harry Truman, in my book, was one of the top people in politics that we've ever had, but that's my own personal opinion. I can't answer your question.
Okay.
I think Mark's got a good point.
Let's go back to
my prejudice or bias or feeling, I always feel for the underdog.
I understand.
But when they kill a bunch of our own people, like they did, my feeling and the drive behind my feeling in this is that the bereaved, the ones who lost their husbands, their wives, their children, have never really had their day in court as far as recognition. And those that the six that are not identified have a common grave. They didn't put on that marker that who did it. It just said lost on the eastern end of the Mediterranean.
Very good.
That effect.
We're going to go back to Mark.
It's just been a propaganda deal, APAC, and actually, I think you could say we should be at war I could have been at war from all the spies and all the damn mess that has been sold. And, of course, there again, Clinton's administration gave the Chinese. Jimmy Carter gave the Panama Canal away, and then he wouldn't go into well, anyway, politics is something that I just have to stay away from.
Okay. All right, Mark.
Si, senor.
Si, senor. What do you think? Tell me, how do you see the relationship between the United States and Israel? Why are we would not have put up with any country attacking our ships and actually killing our people? Why are we, how do you see this relationship? I don't understand.
Well, it's a relationship that has changed over the years. The biggest weapon that obviously that they have in their arsenal, first of all, is their ability to cloud our thinking and to distract us. I mean, are we paying attention? I watch the news every night. Are we paying attention to our young people dying in the Middle East? No. We're reading about Britney Spears shaving her head, or about some boyfriend of a model inheriting millions of dollars after she died. We have no idea what is going on with regards to our country. Now, 40 years ago, it probably could be said to be different. We weren't as stupid of a people as we are today, and I hate to have to use that term, but it is the truth. We really don't know anything about anything.
Okay.
So, but I think that it goes much deeper than that. Having gotten involved in this business of reading about this relationship between America and Israel, I think it goes much deeper than simply bribing our officials or threatening them with embarrassing pictures or anything like that. I really think what it boils down to is nuclear blackmail. I think that the Israelis have made it quite clear to every president since Johnson that if anything is done that would jeopardize her existence in any way, and she calls it an existential threat, that she's going to take the world down with her. And incidentally, this has been Israeli military policy for the last 30 years, which is that if she's ever it looks like she's going to go down, she's going to take the world down with her.
Yeah, but we can't live in this world thinking that way, that a country, if it's going to go down, then we'll take the whole world with her. Stay with me, Mark. Stay with me. We're going to continue with this. But as I promised Captain Bostons that I was not going to keep him for the whole hour, sir, I just wanted to say thank you very much for coming on the program. It really has been an honor and a pleasure having you here tonight.
You know, I'm sorry that I didn't have too good a hearing aid here to know some of the questions that were asked until you repeated them, and it made it a little difficult. There's one thing I want to say, but then I'll get off.
Sure.
This is October the 29th, 2003. Israel's enemies revisit USS Liberty. Written by Jerome S. Kaufman, Kaufman. Said periodically an enemy of Israel surfaces and once again revives the ancient canard of an attack by Israel on USS Liberty during the 66-day war. That Israel fought against the combined forces of Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon, and enthusiastically supported by the former Soviet Union. These powers were resoundingly defeated, undoubtedly due to the good graces of a higher being. In any case, just this week, October the 27th, 2003, in the Washington Times, Captain Ward Boston, a former Navy attorney involved in the investigation, suddenly had an epiphany wherein he revealed that he was told by President Lyndon Johnson, now conveniently deceased, and former Defense Secretary Robert McNair, also now conveniently deceased, to conclude in his investigation that the incident was an accident, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. 36 years later, for some obscure reason, the captain just signed an affidavit to that effect. One cannot wonder why the sudden epiphany. Has yet another U.S. government former official become the recipient of the well-known Saudi Arabian Golden Parachute retirement plan? It also seems to have graciously fallen upon former secretaries of state, senators, journalists, and so forth. Well, that was interesting because, as I said, I didn't come out until Johnson and McNair were both dead. So on September the 27th, 2004, ex-defense secretary ties the knot in Italy. Robert McNair married an Italian-born widow in Italy. A private ceremony yesterday with the 88-year-old former U.S. defense secretary calling the occasion a very happy day. See, he wasn't dead. But if he were, then nobody told him. So anyway, did you hear me?
Yes.
Huh?
Yes, very clear.
Well, then anyway, that James Jerome S. Kaufman, he must have been a shill of Crystal and Israelis. But he starts out saying you're going to have to get organized and fight Boston.
Apparently, of course, you know, anytime you say anything about Israel, you are an enemy of Israel, you're an enemy of the Jews, and you are an anti-Semitic. So that's
I've been called anti-Semitic. Yet I studied oboe with the solo oboist in New York Philharmonic before World War II. Harold Gomberg is probably the greatest oboist that ever lived, and it was the closest, dearest friend I probably ever had before I came in the Navy in 1942. And Harold Gomberg and I were just like brothers. There's not an anti-Semitic bone in my body, but like I say, Thomas Jefferson said he loved the country, but he didn't like some of the leaders. I love my country, and I don't like some of the leaders too, but at the same time, I don't like these leaders of other countries that end up, and just like Sharon, they're going up on the Temple Mountain and causing all the problems that develop. He's still alive, isn't he?
That's a good question.
I think they got him locked up someplace, but I don't recall.
He's locked up in some place, but I think it's too cold wherever he is, but they don't want to say where he is.
I know, but I say there's another example. Deception. Win by deception. Okay,
Right.
It was nice talking with you, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for coming on. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have one of our own in a couple of minutes. Gary Brummett, I believe. He's from Louisiana. And as a matter of fact, he's been on Tom Parker's show. And last year, we broadcast that on the internet. And we also had that interview on Google's video with Tom Parker and Gary and another guy who's from actually local from Lafayette. But in a couple of minutes, we're going to have Gary with us. And we will, now Gary was on the Liberty ship actually when it was attacked. And we're going to ask him how was it during those hours of probably, I think almost like 24 hours. So anyhow, Mark.
Yes, sir.
Si, senor.
Yes, Captain.
No, the captain is gone. Now, listen, this is crazy, and I mean, it's beyond my comprehension that people with this anti-Semitic weapon that's being thrown at them, or even when they just threaten to use it, people are running scared. Why in the world, how can we defeat this anti-Semitic thing? Because I know 99, and I stated this on my radio program last Saturday, that probably 99.999% of people who are being labeled as anti-Semitic, they are not. But this weapon is being used, and it scares the heck out of people, and people will not talk because they don't want to be labeled as anti-Semites. Tell me, how can we get rid of this? How can we defeat this weapon?
Well, as with anything, it takes people losing their fear. Now, as it stands right now, we are a very comfortable people, okay? Even those of us who are very poor, we have food on our tables at least 3 times a day. Our houses are warm. We have running water. All of these things, we don't know what it's like really to grow up with nothing. We don't know what it's like to grow up in a war zone. I can guarantee you that when things change in this country, and I believe that they will unless some drastic changes take place, when things change and people begin to feel the bite, they're going to start asking questions as to how all of this came about. And when they do, they're not going to settle with, pardon my French, with any half-assed answers. It's going to be hard to blame the Muslims when you have all of these rich Jewish politicians, media types, and all of the rest of that who are sitting there with red faces and who obviously are guilty for having brought all of this on.
Okay.
And so when the American people start to feel the bite, and particularly, the other thing that I have noticed since I've been following this is that, the Zionists are getting very sloppy. Okay, this last operation with 9/11, they were sloppy enough that 200 of their agents were caught, were arrested, some of them were sloppy enough to allow themselves to be seen cheering as the towers were coming down. Okay, they are suffering from a certain amount of arrogance and insolence right now. They feel that the American people are, it's like two burglars who have broken into a home, and they look at the guy, and the guy is sitting over there, and he's snoring away, and they say, okay, we don't have to be so careful about pulling the drawers out. This guy is a heavy sleeper. And so they get careless. Now, I believe that the Zionists, and I hate to predict things, but, with this next thing, this upcoming war with Iran, I think that they're going to pull something extraordinarily large in order to mobilize the American people into supporting this thing. And I think that they're probably going to be sloppy. We have good people in our intelligence services. We have good people in our law enforcement services. And they can't all be silenced. There are FBI agents who are fully aware of what is going on with regards to Israel and her spying and her sabotage in the United States.
Very good.
And they cannot be kept silent forever. At some point, and whether it's them or whether it's the military, that's the thing too. The military can only be pushed so far before it's going to say, forget it. We're going to throw these bombs out and we're going to start over.
Mark, thank you very much. I'm going to have to let you go because I have a lot of people calling, and they promised they're buying us new phones, and when that happens, I'll be able to keep everybody on at the same time. But I'm going to have to let you go because I'm going to talk to Gary, and then I have other people waiting.
Okay.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it. Okay, before I go to Gary, let me just catch a couple of these people. Ramsey, go ahead.
Hello, sir.
Yes, hi. Very quick, please.
Hello. I just want to mention that there wasn't the first time Israel attacked the United States. You got the Lavon affair in 1954.
Right.
You got the Jonathan Pollock case.
Right.
You got, and recently you got Louis Libby, Scooter Libby, was Jewish, who was convicted of treason, and he got 25 years sentence, thank God. And sir, regarding your question about the new anti-Semitism, sir, there has been studies that have been done regarding the new anti-Semitism, that it's all hysteria, and the new anti-Semitism is always related to criticism to people who criticize Israel. So it has nothing to do with anti-Semitic.
Right. Actually, they're digging their own grave with that one, because now people go on to say, this anti-Semitism, if you're against Israel, then you're anti-Semitism, then they're going to buy it anymore. Ramsey, thanks for the call. I'm running out of time. I'm sorry, I have to...
Yeah, no problem, sir. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, bye. Okay, Gary, hold on with me. I got one more to go to, and then I'm all yours. Good. No, I think he's gone. I believe Freedom is gone. Let me see. Freedom, go ahead.
Yes, Dr. Talawi, and is Mark Glenn still there, you guess?
No, Mark left. We're working on the phones. I can only have one person at a time.
Okay, here's what I want to ask you. Right now, I'm on the horns of a dilemma. Look, we know that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard 12 days ago captured 15 British sailors,
right,
who apparently went over the state line into their territory, and they captured them. But what I can't understand is this. George Bush and Tony Blair and all these guys, when they captured Afghanis and whatnot on the battlefield, we took them to different CIA prisons, and we waterboarded them, and we tortured them. Let me ask you a question. If Ahmadinejad and the Revolutionary Guard is so evil, why haven't they tortured the 15 British soldiers? Could you please explain the moral dilemma to me? If Ahmadinejad is so evil, why are we the ones that did the torture and the rendition at Guantanamo and all them places? Could you explain the moral difference for me? And thanks, Doc.
Appreciate it. Well, I think it's obvious, because most of the people that we supposedly captured, we did not capture them. We just picked them up on the streets of Afghanistan and the streets of Islamabad in Pakistan. We brought them to Guantanamo Bay and other CIA camps, secret camps, and tortured them. And the majority of them, by the way, were innocent people, innocent bystanders, who just were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And we heard a lot of stories that these people, some of them, one story that I heard, he was a Pakistani going to Afghanistan on a vacation when 9/11 happened, and basically, or when we attacked, because he was there. and he could not leave to go back to Pakistan. We brought him over here to Guantanamo Bay, and then after a year or 2 years, we sent him back saying, look, we're sorry after we have tortured him. But, these are soldiers who were caught in Iranian waters, and they are being treated very well. But I think, the Iranians have gotten what they want out of this, because the United States have released one of their, if you remember a couple of months ago, when we picked up a couple of Iranians there in Iraq, and that's basically why they took these 15. So it worked. Let me go to Gary. Gary, are you with me?
Yes, sir, I'm here. I can barely hear you, though.
Okay. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, I can hear you pretty good now.
Okay. Gary, you were actually on the USS Liberty when it was attacked. I want you just to take us back and, in a few minutes, just tell us how was it, how did you spend those many hours from when the attack took place until you guys were rescued?
Well, the day we were attacked, it was just a normal operations type day for us, although we knew we were in a hostile zone. But we were an American ship flying the American flag. On the bow, port and starboard, were the letters GPR-5. GPR was 5-foot-tall letters. The 5 was like a 10-foot letter with USS Liberty. Port and starboard on the rear, on the fantail of the ship. Even though we were in a hostile zone, this was an American ship, and it's not likely somebody's going to attack such a vessel. We were conducting SIGINT operations, signal intelligence. We were supposedly basically there monitoring to try to monitor the Soviets, but we were monitoring everybody in the region. We came under attack. There were 6 antennas on the ship that were for communications purposes. 5 of them were up and on land. They were taken out in the first pass by heat-seeking missiles. And our door to the world was closed. We couldn't even get out an SOS until some of the ETs, the electronic technicians, patched together some line to the tower that had been down and got up on line. And then this frequency itself was being jammed, which has brought a strange question for a long time, or begged a question for a long time. If Israel thought we were an Egyptian ship, why were they jamming U.S. naval frequencies? Once we did get the message out, the Captain Joe Tully of the USS Saratoga, he was the skipper, he's now deceased, immediately launched, and he told me back in the early 90s he wondered why engine on the America hadn't launched. And of course, this first bunch of planes were recalled. They relaunched off the America, and Admiral Larry Geis was the Squadron 60 commander. He was in charge in the field there of everybody. And when they relaunched the planes, they notified the Pentagon that rescue aircraft was on the way. Well, these rescue aircraft, once Robert McNamara got this message, he immediately said, get the planes back on the carrier, and guys challenged this order, and which was his right under the circumstances, and they patched the phone call from the Pentagon to the White House, and Johnson told Admiral Geis, get the planes back on the carrier. I'm not going to do any. I don't care if all the sailors drowned. I'm not going to do anything to embarrass an ally. And
now tell me, did you guys know what was happening in the first few hours, or did you know what was that was the Israelis attacking you?
That is correct. Now, we didn't know who was doing it until it was all over with. See, that's another point there. I mean, that's a real bone of contention. How did Lyndon Johnson know who was attacking us when we didn't even know who was attacking us till it was all over?
Now, what was your job on the Liberty?
I was an engineer. I was one of the guys. It was my job to make the ship move and get us to wherever the devil that we needed to go, so the CTs could conduct their operation to communicate.
So were you like in the engine room?
Right, I was in the fire room. I was a boiler tender.
That room,
what I did, I was a third-class petty officer.
Didn't it flood due to the attack?
Beg your pardon?
The engine room, wasn't it? It was flooded with water at that time during the attack?
No, we were. Now we had some armor-piercing rounds come through the side of the ship, which these came through way after they said they had done quit firing on us, or at least the official record says it. And we had leaks there that filled up the bilges, you might say, but we didn't have flooding down there. We were 3 frames, or about 15 feet from total disaster. Had the torpedo hit the engine room, fire room area, the ship would have immediately broken in half and sank, and they would have got what they were after anyway at that point.
Now, were you aware that the Israelis were circling? Because they did circle in the morning.
Right. Well, they had reconned us roughly 12 times. Now,
so
being an engineer,
were you guys? Was that information passed on to you, to everybody on the ship?
Well, later on, we knew who was reconning us, which, everybody felt good about that. We thought, well, they're our ally. We're not worried about it. They know who we are. And by James fighting ships at 10:55 a.m., June 8, 1967, Tel Aviv time, they had put us on their war room charge as USS Liberty. They had ID'd us through James fighting ships, a British publication. But they had reconned us 10 or 12 times. I don't know how many times, probably 5 or 6 times I heard the captain or whoever the officer of the deck was come on the ship's MC, or the public address system, and request the duty photographic team to come to the bridge, to photograph and try and ID these planes that were buzzing us. I mean, they knew at all times who we were and where we were. There was, it's just impossible to even entertain the thought that they didn't know who we were. It was a bright, clear, sunshiny day, limitless visibility.
Okay. Did you know if your ship had made contact with the 6th Fleet that was there at that time while it was under attack? Did you have any idea?
Yes, the Liberty did finally get up on one radio frequency on off one of the towers, the only one that wasn't blown all the devil and gone. And they did get the word out, and it was picked up by a radioman on the USS Saratoga. And they asked for authentication because everybody's got a code name, a password, you might say. Ours was Rockstar. And, of course, our radio operator gives the guy on the other end a cussing and keyed the mic and said, listen to what's going on. And then they realized that, it was a for real event. This wasn't a hoax that somebody was playing on a Navy frequency. And what really ended up saving us that day, and I think most of the guys would agree to this, later on, because we were under aerial attack at this point. That was prior to the torpedo boats getting to us. Our 6th Fleet aircraft could have gotten to us before the PT boats would have, and could have stopped that from happening, which that killed 25 men and virtually destroyed the ship. It was, decommissioned after this all happened. But I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, let me ask you this: were you wondering at one point, where are our guys? Why aren't they coming to help us?
Oh yes, we thought that they were coming to our aid, and what I was fixing to say, and like I say, I lost my train of thought. The attack on our ship, the Israeli version says, after the torpedo hit, they came alongside and said, "Oh, can we help?" Well, that ain't exactly true. They came alongside, but they were still firing on us. Now, they did eventually quit firing, but I contend that they only quit because they run out of ammunition. If you look at the ship and you look at all the holes and the indentations in it, they had to have been out of ammunition. But a radio operator on the Saratoga sent back a message at some point later that help was on the way. Now, as I understand it, and I'm not a communications technician or an ET, this was broadcast on an open-air frequency. Anybody out there that was listening could have intercepted this message. Well, see, it was about this time that's when the attack stopped.
Now, let me,
because they
Gary,
knew,
just
for the jet planes and all would have been out of the way, but the MTVs, the motor torpedo boats, could not have evacuated the scene before our fighter aircraft would have got there and ID'd them.
Okay, just for the sake of time, because we only have a few minutes left, did you guys know what were you doing there? I mean, was the mission explained to everybody that we are in international water and we are listening? I mean, did you know what your mission was?
Correct. The captain we had just maybe 5 or 10 minutes prior to the start of the attack, the captain had come on the ship's 1MC, the PA system, and said, you know, we're 12.5, 12.6 nautical miles off the coast of the United Arab Republic. There is hostilities on the beach. You know, we knew where we were at. Egypt claimed 12 miles, Israel claimed 6.
So you were definitely in international water. Did you lose any friends?
We were in international waters. We were a neutral. We were a non-combatant ship.
Gary, you were
all
injured?
we had was 450 caliber machine guns on that ship, which was only good for just repel borders type situations. It wasn't something you fight with.
What type of injury did you suffer, Gary?
Beg your pardon?
Were you injured on that day?
I got a Purple Heart for some scratches I got, and that's about it.
Nothing major?
No, sir, not for me.
Did you lose any close friends on that day?
Well, I mean, I was on that ship for probably 15 months at that time, and that was my 3rd cruise on the Liberty. And there were very few people on board that I didn't know. We had picked up 9 specialists in Rota, Spain 6 days earlier. And of these 6, 2 of the 3 Marines got killed, 1 of the civilians got killed, and 2 of the sailors out of the 3 got killed. So they didn't fare real well. But did I know everybody? Yes. There were very few of the guys that I didn't know, except the new ones we had just picked up.
Okay. Well, Gary, I know you're going to be down in our area, I believe in May sometimes. Stay in touch with me. Let's keep in touch so we can have you here on the program to tell us more about that day.
Well, I would like to do that where we have a little bit more time and,
yes.
and we can cover the story better from that day to this. And
very good.
Point out the current events.
Very good.
May I ask you a question?
Very quick. We have 1 minute left.
Ward Boston, was he there tonight?
Yes, he was. He was very good.
Okay.
He was excellent. And
all right. Well, I appreciate it. And I guess I will talk to you later.
Very good. Thank you, Gary. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, we only have like half a minute left, so we will see you next Tuesday, hopefully with another story. And just go learn about the USS Liberty. And we do need to talk about our relationship with Israel. We must talk about this relationship because it's costing us a lot, and especially now, it did not just cost us the 34 that we lost back then. Now it's costing us over 3,300 people in Iraq. So we'll see you next Tuesday. Go do the right thing. See you then.
This Week in History.